Let's talk about that debate with our political guest tonight. We've asked each campaign for a surrogate to join us here in the studio.
So we are joined by Brian Schimming for Senator Ron Johnson's team and Joe Zepecki for Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes's team.
So Joe, let's start with you. It was a lively debate. What do you think Barnes said or did tonight to convince any undecided voters?
Well, I hope a lot of people watched the debate because the contrast was on clear display. I think the most important thing that Lieutenant Governor Barnes did was demonstrate that different perspective that he would bring to the United States Senate, that middle class, upbringing that he talked about repeatedly, stands in stark contrast to Senator Johnson, who I think came across pretty angry, clearly was painted as an out-of-touch millionaire, and that's a contrast that I think the Barnes campaign wants, and they saw that tonight.
Brian, both candidates brought their boxing gloves. Did Senator Johnson move any undecided voters tonight?
Look, elections are about a choice, and one thing that we saw in the debate tonight is the vast difference between these two candidates. Look, Mandela Barnes' problem, frankly, is reality. The reality of 8.5% inflation, the reality of a porous border, the reality of increased violent crime across this country, and the reality of deficit spending in Washington. All things that Mandela Barnes doesn't seem to want to do anything about. Ron Johnson does, and I think the voters saw that tonight.
Well, we also saw some sharp exchanges on the topic of inflation and supporting a living wage. Let's listen.
The problem people are having is the out-of-control inflation caused by out-of-control deficit spending, our growing debt, and Democrats' war on fossil fuel. Again, a dollar you had at the start of the Biden administration is only worth 88.3 cents.
For one of the most wealthy members of Congress to sit and say that Congress shouldn't set a standard of living and raising the minimum wage is the frustration that so many people have in this country. It's why people are tuned out of politics, because they feel like nobody's looking out for them.
All right, Joe, Republicans say that this election is about kitchen tables like inflation. Does that issue hurt Democrats?
Well, it shouldn't. Senator Johnson has had the opportunity to vote for legislation in Washington that would help working families. Instead, he voted against legislation that would have cracked down on big oil companies for price gouging, voted against the Inflation Reduction Act, which will lower the cost of health insurance. And I thought Mandela was particularly effective tonight at pointing out Senator Johnson has had 12 years. None of these challenges arose overnight. And the fact that Senator Johnson went to the "Are you better off than 2 years ago" question tonight in his close, I thought was really interesting, because you cannot deny that out of the pandemic with a job-healthy recovery, we're in a pretty good shape compared to 2 years ago.
Brian, Democrats believe this race is about abortion and women's right to choose. Does that issue hurt Republicans?
It doesn't hurt Republicans, and frankly, the whole set of issues facing voters in this election, including a healthy recovery. This is the first time I've heard those two words used together. We're not in a healthy recovery. People are losing their financial independence. The country is in as tough a shape as it has been in years. Look, if Mandela Barnes wants to defend this recovery that the president thinks he has us on, he can go right ahead. The voters, they know better, and every poll shows it.
All right, Brian Schimming, Joe Zepecki, thank you both for coming here tonight.